If a character is racist, sexist, homophobic or in any way bigoted, that does not mean the author is too. Maybe a hot take, maybe just a rant, but I see many TikTokers and Goodreads reviewers point fingers real fast when it comes to this situation in particular. Characters can be nasty, ignorant, and morally corrupt. The thing is, one should question, why did the author portray them this way? What's the bigger picture instead of rapidly condemning the person behind the pen? There are times when yes, a character is a vessel for an author's views, but most often, it is not. A common misconception is that the main character should be likable for the reader to empathize with them. No. One can dislike them all throughout the novel. It is not a rule that they have to act or think ethically. Less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than whatever happened to and quat. Depiction dozen and hash 39. T mean endorsement and quat. Less than P greater than. Less than div greater than. Less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than. I haven't heard this phrase before, but I like it. Less than P greater than less than div greater than. Less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than. As do I think the entirety of Twitter needs to learn that one. Less than P greater than less than div greater than. Less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than. No shit. I got into an argument on Twitter a while back with a guy who was seriously claiming there was no valid reason ever to read a biography of Robert E. Lee because all we needed to know about him was that he was racist or something. Not surprisingly, this guy was apparently an ex-fundie and didn't seem to realize that he'd ported the exact same mindset over to the other side of the spectrum. Less than P greater than. Less than div greater than. Less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than. There's a scene in the movie Tar where Cate Blanchett is discussing Bach. Her grad student dismisses his music because Bach was heterosexual and had lots of children. It seems that this line of reasoning is a recurring meme. I've experienced it in music. In the 1970s, my tough friends refused to listen to David Bowie. But never in literature. I guess the assumption was that those who are educated and/or are readers would know better. Not so long ago, it would be best to use book covers if inclined to read the English editions of Mein Kampf and the Koran on the subway. Now one might meet quite a few new friends. It's all ridiculous. Less than P greater than. Less than div greater than. Less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than. Your insinuation that the Koran is as bad as Mein Kampf is really odd. Less than P greater than. Less than div greater than. Less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than. You proved my point with that comment. And there was no insinuation. That's something from you. Less than P greater than. Less than div greater than. Less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than. Na creators need to learn Twitter users are not consumers. Less than P greater than less than div greater than. Less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than. Don and hash 39. T worry. Most of Twitter left Twitter last year. Less than P greater than less than div greater than. Less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than. Not hardly. 6.8 billion visits just in December of 2023. According to Statistica. Maybe just who you follow. Less than P greater than. Less than div greater than. Less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than. Many humans left Twitter. Total users went up. Make of that what you will. Cough cough. Less than M greater than bots. Less than M greater than cough. Less than P greater than. Less than div greater than. Less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than. Always was bots. Bot. Less than P greater than less than div greater than. less than div class equals MD greater than less than P greater than, and even when it less than M greater than is less than M greater than endorsement. That doesn't and hash 39 T mean the book is complete garbage. If you and hash 39 not reading less than M greater than good less than M greater than work written by deeply flawed people, including the ones whose beliefs might be hatefully on display sometimes in their work, then you and hash 39 basically assuming that either less than P greater than less than P greater than a hateful, misguided person is incapable of producing effective art, less than P greater than less than P greater than B. Artists on the and quat right side and quat of every issue are always the best ones to teach you what goes on in the hearts and minds of the ones who are wrong. Less than P greater than less than P greater than. While I certainly have no objection when the market effectively deplatforms of fearmongering, racist or fascist with nothing useful to say, the fact remains, both less than M greater than A and B are bullshit. Less than M greater than in reality. It and hash 39 downright dangerous to assume it and hash 39 easy to understand what drives someone without experiencing their personal best attempts to tell their truths, being afraid to do that, or judging others for doing that. ISN and hash 39 T being and quat socially responsible, and quat it and hash 39 setting yourself up to repeat history and become a victim or perpetrator yourself. Less than P greater than less than P greater than. If a story makes you angry, sad, confused, or frustrated about something that happened in a fictional reality, well then you got those experiences for and quat free. And quat it and hash 39 certainly interesting, and sometimes important, to also add the author to the equation and find out where they end and the story begins. Less than P greater than less than P greater than. But ultimately, the story means less than M greater than whatever it means to you. Less than M greater than. It can provide tremendous value, even if that value includes realizing you and hash 39 going to spend the rest of your life fighting against everything that writer stands for. Like it or not, they helped you. That was a and quat good book and quat less than strong greater than for you to read. Less than strong greater than less than P greater than less than div greater than.
Fucking thank you. This purity culture bullshit annoys the hell out of me. Feeling morally superior is a hell of a drug. That's every online community nowadays. If you can get the moral high ground off of someone else, then you must do so. Yep, it's the same thing that religious superiority was, Bible thumpers, but now we can see it'll still be around in a post-religious world. The righteousness will come from social morals. Maybe the real religion we found was the meddling we did along the way. The religious right is pretty alive and well. I oppose purity culture for art on both the right and left, though. That kind of scares me just as much, the notion that mainstream society will decide what is moral and immoral. Is that not what society has always done? It's the new religion opiate of the masses. We're in that fun culture shift where the younger generations have completely swung the pendulum the other way, yet don't see that they're becoming their grandparents. My sister is 24 and is very into social movements, but hates anything that isn't written through a lens of endorsing social justice. I have to remind her that, while she has good intent, writing complex characters that don't reflect your views is a great way to demonstrate maturity while giving commentary. Not doing so is how we've gotten book bannings burnings. I mean, as much as people want to act like you can't say anything anymore, Succession, a show entirely about awful people, just won the Best Drama Emmy. The most popular show of the past decade was Game of Thrones, a show featuring some of the most repugnant characters in TV history. Always Sunny, a show where all the main characters are terrible people, is about to enter like season 17. Rick and Morty is insanely popular. Curb Your Enthusiasm is entering its final season. The Boys is a huge hit. The list goes on and on. There are plenty of artists out there portraying awful people who say and do awful things. No one bitches if it's done well, and intelligent people can easily separate the artist from their characters. I'll go with the TV movie tangent, despite this being our books, because it's so rare I overhear discussion about books IRL. That's why I'm here. I often hear boomers talk about old controversial movies like Blazing Saddles, with the mindset that you just couldn't make a movie like that today because people are too sensitive. But I think if I sat those people down and showed them It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, they would be incredibly uncomfortable and likely offended by the content. You couldn't make Blazing Saddles today because everyone would say, hey, this is just the 1974 Western Blazing Saddles by Mel Brooks. Actually, Mel Brooks couldn't do Blazing Saddles solo during his time. He had massive support and help from Richard Pryor to write the movie in a way that would parody the racism with it being social commentary, instead of just harping on stereotypes like Naked Gun airplane movies would do. I mostly brought up TV shows because I think it's easier to pinpoint the types of characters that were relevant to the discussion at hand. Plus, I needed to choose popular and successful shows for the argument to make sense, whereas I don't really have any idea what books are super popular right now outside of Fourth Wing, which I haven't read and don't plan to, so I couldn't really comment on whether or not it fits my argument. You can't even make the same Zonk. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia today. Hulu removed some episodes that they deemed as too controversial, rather than letting viewers decide what they can and can't stomach. They removed episodes for having blackface in them. I agree they should let the viewers decide, and the blackface is obviously a parody poking fun at the characters themselves, but the show in general is as offensive as ever, and the characters haven't changed at all. I disagree. There's no way they would let them make another episode with satirical blackface. I doubt Tropic Thunder could even get made today, and that movie is barely 15 years old. The major cultural shift didn't happen between Blazing Saddles and 2010. It's happened in the last 5 to 10 years. The major cultural shift didn't happen between Blazing Saddles and 2010. It's happened in the last 5 to 10 years. Ding, 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 ding. Yep, D-Day aired in 2019 and was pulled in 2020 and still gone. That's how fast the shift has been. Is Hulu removing episodes not evidence of the shift, though? It's evidence of one company overreacting. Tropic Thunder hasn't been wiped from existence. I believe it's on Paramount. There are plenty of episodes of Sunny far more offensive than the Lethal Weapon ones that still exist. Some essayist YouTuber, maybe Lindsay Ellis, pointed out that the reason you couldn't do Blazing Saddles today isn't because of anything offensive, but because a Western parody would have even less of an audience today because of how far removed the main audience is from Western shows and movies. I grew up with Western show reruns like Bonanza, Clint Eastwood Western movies, spaghetti Western movies like the Terrence Hill and Bud Spencer movies, and that's not something younger millennials and Gen Z, etc. got as far as I, elder millennial, know. Who has written, or is going to write, this generation's Lolita? I think people do complain if it is done well oftentimes, but it depends on what is portrayed and how. The Boys is incredibly unsubtle and mostly skewers right-wing Americans. It isn't very provocative. Succession wasn't necessarily watched by that many, and was also, by its premise, a parody of rich capitalists. I do agree you can definitely have some complexity, but I definitely don't think quality insulates art from pearl clutching. I doubt Gen Z and younger purity contests have much of an impact on Big's awards shows. Yet. I think younger people have grown up with so many options to watch or read things that they only have engaged with what they want. Therefore, it is easier to have the expectation that media should cater to them only or be made with a specific intent. Whether it is a book or a movie or a video game, content that you like doesn't have to be continually made for you. It's why we end up getting rants about Pixar movies from adults, and it's like it's a kid's movie. Just move on. But now that so much media, especially the most popular media of the past 100 years, can be streamed, people have the expectation that new entries should be what they always wanted. This everything has to be for everyone mentality is completely out of control. On TikTok, there was a video a woman made showing how she makes her favorite bean soup, with several different types of beans. The amount of comments asking how to make it without beans because they don't like beans was insane. It's bean soup. I see it happening everywhere now. Are you actually blaming the authors of banned and burned books on why their shit gets burned in that last sentence, instead of blaming the literal fascists that do it? 2 years ago, I tried to read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, which has won one of the most prestigious prizes in sci-fi. It was unreadable. I made it about 1/3 of the way through the book, because of all the woke bullshit it endlessly tried to propagate. One long, blatant, ham-fistedly hectoring pamphlet for woke ideology. It was truly unbearable. I've got a friend like this, raging full-blown SJW type, but loves Cthulhu and the Lovecraft mythos. I just want to shake him and be like, dude, read the works. Lovecraft was racist as fuck. One of his poems is titled On the Creation of N-Words. The person you're replying to is saying that filtering your reading so that it only conforms to your pre-existing worldview is wrong. And here you are talking about your friend who doesn't do this, and you think that's the same thing? Should we read the works of people we disagree with or not? You're not making sense. No, you're just not comprehending. I am saying my friend very much holds to what could be called cancel culture and believes that you should not separate the art from the artist. That of the creator is a bad person, according to modern morals, that you should not enjoy their works. This is hilarious to me because they love Cthulhu and H.P. Lovecraft, but have absolutely no idea what a racist Lovecraft was. I find the hypocrisy born of ignorance to be amusing. How we've gotten book burnings is from hateful people, Nazis, destroying books involving minority groups, queer people. Not from people riding through a lens they prefer. You missed the point. Burnings at the end of the day are meant to snuff out opposing viewpoints or ideas of representation. You need to be able to look at views contrary to your own and ascertain how a person reached that view in the first place to avoid going down the wrong path. Extremists on any side are counterproductive to discussion and progress. It's just absurd to basically say the woke SJW left is criticizing choosing not to read this book, and that's the same as book burnings, when the far right has been doing book burnings and censorship for literally centuries. Lol. Criticism is extremely far from book burnings or censorship, and it's in comparison to the people who have been literally doing that for, again, centuries. The extremists on one side are attempting to not only snuff out opposing views, but the people those views come from as well. It's hardly a both sides equally thing. It's just a more socially acceptable version of anti-intellectualism. Little bit of a rant. I've noticed lately that some people are reluctant to root for badass characters because they have morally fucked up flaws. Daemon Targaryen, for example. Did he groom his 14-year-old niece? Yes. Is he also a badass fighter? Absolutely. Rooting for the character doesn't mean you endorse their terrible behavior IRL. It's fiction. Fefs. Root for the bad guy and have a good time. Additionally, you don't need to root for anyone to find it fascinating and interesting. Seeing how people, including bad people, react and act in situations is interesting and gives you other perspectives. Like, I really enjoyed Breaking Bad, even though the only one I rooted for was Flynn, and sometimes Jesse. It doesn't make me better that I didn't root for anyone. It just means I didn't care which path they would wind up in, because it was all interesting to me, and because I dislike a lot of awful people. Normal people can tolerate because of childhood abuse. Like the House of Cards show, by even its title alone, promised someone's rise and fall, and the characters and situations were interesting. The book Lolita by Nabokov. No, I wasn't raped as a child. His main character is infuriating and vile from page one, narcissistic as hell. But seeing someone that disgusting, that's far removed from your own life, is incredibly cathartic, because Nabokov masterfully constantly shows how vile he is and how the truth keeps slipping through the cracks. It really helps hammer in that being an abused child is not your fault. Disgusting, abusive liars are going to lie and abuse. The main character of a story doesn't have to be someone you can root for in order for the story to be great and even helpful. Very excellent and well-written point. GRRM is the master of making you root for unsympathetic characters. The Hound and Jaime Lannister are both child murderers and all-around terrible people. But damn if you don't find yourself starting to feel like you understand them. Technically, Jaime is only an attempted child murderer. Bran lived, and I don't think he ever killed a different child in canon, maybe a teenager on the battlefield or something like that. The compelling thing is, for all of Jaime's faults, he's not even close to competing with the truly terrible people in Asoyaf, like Tywin, Gregor Clegane, Euron, Walder Frey, the Boltons, etc. You're probably safer around Jaime Lannister than most other men on Planetos. True. You know it's good writing when a character throws a child out of a tower, but then a few hundred pages later you're like, I could still have a beer with this guy. Definitely. Love me some Hound. Because they know these idiots who can't tell fact from fiction are going to bully them over it. Yeah, the amount of people I've seen complain on the internet that all these idiots are fans of Homelander and they don't realize he's not supposed to be a badass character. Like, I'm pretty sure everyone knows he's supposed to be a massive piece of shit. That doesn't mean you can't be a fan of his character. And I'm also pretty sure people are such big fans of him because he's extremely entertaining, not because they think he's the most moral superhero, lol. There is an actual minority of genuine Homeland sympathizers that come out of the woodwork to defend his actions when this topic is brought up. It's obviously not every Homelander fan, but it's definitely some. Yeah, it's weird to pretend that these people don't exist, lol. They're all over the place, and they love to spew their fascistic nonsense. I'd bet money that the few people who do that are rage baiting, though I wish it was easier to tell, lol. Nazis do actually exist, is the thing. I'd bet money that some Nazis rage bait people for entertainment. Which is irrelevant, BC it's still what they actually believe, BC they're Nazis. It's fiction, thefts. This is the perfect summary for this entire post. People that are offended by fiction or can't distinguish it from reality need to grow up. Yeah, fiction has never been used to teach lessons or point out real things about society. It's just fiction. It can't possibly have a message or a theme. It can't possibly have something more to say than just the literal story that has no influence from real-world ideas. It certainly can. The point is, it doesn't always need to. That was not at all the point you made. The point you made was that it's fiction, so don't get offended or take it seriously. I pointed out that just because it's fiction doesn't mean it can't have something to say about the real world. Yeah, and my point absolutely stands, because even if a piece of fiction has something to say about the real world, which might be the case or not, you can take it as seriously as you want. But if you get offended by fiction or mistake it for reality, you need to grow up. Nope. If a piece of fiction has something to say about the real world, it's perfectly reasonable to take it seriously and criticize it. If a fiction book supports racism, then that's a support for racism. The idea that you should just not criticize it because it's fiction doesn't hold up at all. Growing up includes understanding how stories work. It means understanding how myths used to work and why kids' movies and shows always have lessons. With that comes the understanding it's not just fiction. It's often a way to make sense of the world and to get a message across. There's no reason to take it any less seriously than anything else. But my online clout, How will I feel morally superior? We're in that fun culture shift where the younger generations have completely swung the pendulum the other way, yet don't see that they're becoming their grandparents. My sister is 24 and is very into social movements, but hates anything that isn't written through a lens of endorsing social justice. I have to remind her that, while she has good intent, writing complex characters that don't reflect your views is a great way to demonstrate maturity while giving commentary. There's a lot of privilege involved with being able to separate the art from the artist. I hear this line mostly from people with a lot of privilege. Words have power. People on a subreddit dedicated to books should know that. If an author, or especially their works, are actively hostile against you as a person, it can be difficult to separate the author from the work. Usually someone with more privilege than me, but the splaining continues. Do you actually have anything to say? Sit down, ally. Lol, the ally scolds trans people about privilege, then blocks them. Empathy is one of those things that if you're always telling people you have it, you don't have it. I wasn't scolding you, I was just tired of being talked down to by someone who wasn't interested in having a conversation. I'm not exactly cis myself, but you wouldn't know that because you weren't interested in talking. It's weird that you assume I'm merely an ally and not someone struggling in some way. It's weird that you assume that you are struggling more than others by default. It's weird that you can't extend empathy to others. This is it for me. I firmly believe the value of what a book has to say rests largely with the reader, who is interpreting the work through the lens of their own experience and understanding. I have certainly read a fair few books that have been very influential on my worldview by authors I came to know much later, held political views I would find troubling to abhorrent. That perhaps a character was intended to be more literal than caution, for instance, but to me, they were a cautionary tale. I expect that there are zero authors whose worldviews align perfectly with my own, whose views are not in some aspect, now or in a retrospective future, troubling. But that does not stop the positive value I took from their books being such. I think how you interpret a book is more a reflection of you than of the author. Fantastic points, particularly about authors being judged for present-day norms by future standards. People do that now, and it annoys me no end. Some people are out there calling Mark Twain a racist for his choice of words. Of all authors to accuse of being a racist, lol. He perhaps was a little racist towards Native Americans earlier in his career, but softened substantially later on, as I recall. And even if this anti-slavery, pro-women's suffrage man, a bigot, he's very, very dead. You're not financing anything harmful by purchasing Twain's works. I would also go far as to say it's important to read books of people we disagree with. Keeping your mind open and practicing epistemic rationality is, I think, key to eliminating the binary thinking that keeps us so divided. If you really feel strongly about not financially supporting an author, there are options. Just don't close yourself off to information. Even if it's ultimately information you see no value in, that strengthens your existing beliefs. I agree with you up to a point, but I'd also like to add that if you are engaging with this kind of content or having a young person do so, it's important to do research and have a conversation. A lot of early cowboys and Indians literature is racist as fuck. Depiction doesn't always equal endorsement, but sometimes it definitely does. One character of dubious judgment saying racist things isn't bad, but when you truck in the stereotype that some dirty, savage cannibal is going to eat, rape, scalp some damsel unless the big, strong white dude comes along and saves her, and heroically and wittily says something racist while doing so, then you've worked your narrative to endorse his beliefs. You're looking at endorsement. Native Americans and Mark Twain are a good example. This is the author who wrote, "Nothing but a poor, filthy, naked, scurvy vagabond, whom to exterminate were a charity to the Creator's worthier insects and reptiles which he oppresses." Not in fiction, mind you, himself as an essayist. A little racist for calling Native Americans lower than bugs and lizards and calling it a kindness to God to kill them? We like Mark Twain, so we like to look away from him and not remember his shitty side. But he was a product of his times, and also using his voice in advancing these attitudes among his contemporaries. You say he got better, but in 1907 he said, "A university degree is a prize that I would go far to get at any time. I take the same childlike delight in a new degree that an Indian takes in a fresh scalp, and I take no more pains to conceal my joy than the Indian does." He died in 1910. That might be better, but it's still racist as fuck, and not the kinds of views we should toss to our kids without a massive asterisk. I don't think we throw out Mark Twain. I do think we go back and re-look at the arcs of the stories of those early books before you lend them to the generation down, and have a real hard, unflinching reread to figure out whether you're dealing with depiction or endorsement. Then react accordingly, from a place unclouded by sentimentality. Maybe they just need to be saved for when young people reach a reading level where they are more capable of being suspicious of the agenda of the author. I can tell you I read those books in school age 9 and remember getting a talking to from the teacher about never using the N-word. And that worked great. I don't know if Native Americans just didn't come up in the one we read, but I hope if they had, there'd have been a bigger conversation about hateful and dehumanizing stereotypes. You say he got better, but in 1907 he said, "A university degree is a prize that I would go far to get at any time. I take the same childlike delight in a new degree that an Indian takes in a fresh scalp, and I take no more pains to conceal my joy than the Indian does." He died in 1910. That might be better, but it's still racist as fuck. I do consider this passage from Following the Equator, 1897, to be a softening of his position. Yes, you observe the combination? It is robbery, humiliation, and slow murder through poverty and the white man's whiskey. The savage's gentle friend, the savage's noble friend, the only magnanimous and unselfish friend the savage has ever had, was not there with the merciful, swift release of his poisoned pudding. There are many humorous things in the world. Among them, the white man's notion that he is less savage than the other savages. Obviously, the word savages seems, as you put it, racist as fuck by modern standards, which is exactly what I'm talking about. But if you actually read what he's saying, that the natives were horribly wronged and deceived by white people, that all humans, including whites, possess an equal potential for savagery. This was tantamount to a revolutionarily anti-racist statement at the time, and I don't think the off-color joke you mention him telling in 1907 erases that, particularly when judged by the standards of the time. He had a habit for changing his opinions for the better, or at least what I personally believe to be the better. Another example is his U-turn on imperialism. I'm not referring to the use of the word savages. I mean his discussing their having a childish joy at the thought of scalping someone, held up in comparison to his own desire for a university education. It's pretty minimizing to reduce that to a complaint about the single word and off-color joke. I mean his discussing their having a childish joy at the thought of scalping someone. Yet it was a proud moment for some tribes to scalp a captive, often alive. It was a status symbol and often a step to them becoming recognized as a warrior. The scalping comment is of bad taste by today's standards, yet not at the time it was written said. Good grief. Do you also have an additional explanation for what makes it totally appropriate to lean into the racist stereotype of childishness? From the view of a modern and educated person of his time, it's not difficult to figure out why some had that particular view. That's not condoning any comments. It was a different time and perspective, easy to judge by some now living in today's world and modern standards. Calling anyone a savage is fucked up no matter what time you're in. I don't care if it was normalized doesn't make it right, and it doesn't mean we have to coddle to the racists of the past. Coddle? Mark Twain is dead. What good is coddling going to do him? By a metric so tame as referring to a group by the nomenclature of the time, Savage was an official demonym used by the US government at one point, making someone a bad person. Then there are literally no good people anywhere before maybe the 60s. This happened over 120 years ago. If you seriously can't get your head round that and see the woods for the trees in what he's saying, I feel sorry for you, and dread to imagine your reaction when you find out the original title of M and Then There Were None. Doubtless, context of the time and place and the difference in offensiveness of words between cultures will mean nothing to you, and Agatha Christie, too, will make your I'd-poll shit list. Yeah, the US government was wrong, too, and if people were defending the US government for using that kind of language, I'd have a problem with that, too. Ideas shouldn't be treated any differently because they're from the past. That's stupid. And also, you don't know me. Your snide remarks are incredibly shallow. Damn, you really showed Mark Twain. You must be ever so smart and virtuous to grandstand against his old dead ass. It's not about him, it's about the ideas. There's no reason to treat them any differently just because they're from the past. There actually is a reason to, especially when talking about his language. You have to look at the general attitudes and dialogue at the time to get a complete picture. In 100 years, do you think it will be fair for people to make judgment about your character based on the language you used when it was appropriate at the time? Everyone is a product of their place and time. Yeah, it's kind of like H.P. Lovecraft. Dude was blisteringly racist, and his work and essays show that. I don't think it's wrong to not want to engage with works or media like that. Do I recognize what he did for the genre? Sure. Does that mean I want to read it and engage with it? No. If someone else wants to engage with media that's clearly racist, that's on them. But it's not going to, 1, stop me from not consuming it, and 2, probably not going to stop me from side-eyeing until we have more of a nuanced conversation. At that point, it's not about purity culture. It's about choosing what you want to engage with, and it's about needing the ability to both understand, hey, this author was really racist, while also saying, this author also revolutionized a genre. Exactly. I've read everything Lovecraft has written. You're dead right about his politics. I can enjoy reading him and not go, everyone must, or pretend he was anything other than what he was. You can say Orson Scott Card, the poster child of not getting the point of his own novel. Echo chambers are built from within. Ye best start believing in echo chambers, Miss Turner. You're in one. Eats an upvote only to have it fall through his chest cavity. And one person's hateful, misguided person is another's upright, admirable person, being called hateful and misguided by the hateful and misguided. Agreed. And hell, sometimes a hateful, misguided person is actually expressing a beautiful and constructive idea in a wonderful way. Yet somehow, their ability to paint a picture and or sell a needed idea simply doesn't jive with the person they are otherwise. Orson Scott Card, I'm looking at you. Every permutation is out there, and value doesn't always self-package into the shrink-wrapped presentations we'd prefer to be seen or see ourselves as being a consumer of. Not only that, but sometimes an entire society might label someone or someone's work bad and wrong, only to discover it's their future selves they disagree with, unless they burned it, or them. Oops. None of this is easy, but knee-jerk heuristics that reduce everything down to how useful is this for me in demonstrating I'm on the right side of important issues should really be an easy, nope, that's stupid. That's all fine and good, but I look at it this way. I get the choice of whom to give my money to. So, I could give it to somebody like Card and amplify his voice and give him funds that he could donate to causes I deeply disagree with. I could find an artist whose moral views I don't hate and give them a bit more prominence and money instead. Now, once they're dead, the calculation changes. Once Card is no longer alive, I have no objection to paying for his good works. I'm with you on this. I'm fine with authors who I just disagree with on some issues. With authors I consider hateful, bigoted, or dangerous, who use their publicity to promote those views, I'm definitely not giving them my money. With someone like H.P. Lovecraft, I don't care. He's been dead a long time, and there's no reason to think anyone publishing his works now agrees with his views. Used bookstores are also an option, but I see your point. This Card is a perfect example, as he is a great writer in multiple genres with social and political views that seem to get increasingly awful as time goes on. I'm not going to financially support him today by spending any more money on his works, but I have a good-sized collection of his books that I've owned for decades, and I have no qualms about keeping them and lending them out. But you don't do that with any other type of spending. When you buy food, the money goes to farmers. And you know what causes farmers donate to? How much of your spending is on books? You might say, well, I have no choice there. But do you really want to have a system where Democrats only buy food from Democrat farmers and Republicans only buy food from Republican farmers? I hope not. I hope you can see how detrimental that would be to society. So why would you apply the same standard to books? Yes, you're giving money to someone who might use that money to do harm, but such a system would be even more harmful. Certainly can't be perfect there, but people do try to do it with food to some extent, e.g., fair trade coffee and boycotting Nestle are a thing to some extent. If I could only give my money to farmers who aren't bigoted Nazis, I would. I simply don't have that option. I just pirate authors I don't want to support financially. Nah, the paradox of tolerance is a thing. Only if we subscribe to the fundamental principle of liberalism, that everyone should be free to do whatever they want as long as they're not, in doing so, limiting other people's freedom to do what they want. Codes of ethics that accept other infringements, violation of the law, violation of religious dogma, corruption of the youth, disruption of culture, etc., as sufficient grounds for limiting someone's freedom, might consider the tolerance of such transgressions unethical. And those codes of ethics are fundamentally incompatible with human dignity and can be disregarded. Moral relativism is a framework for critical analysis, not an actual healthy way to look at the world. I'm sure proponents of many different moral frameworks agree with you about that. Yeah, it is, but you don't understand it. Edit. Amazing the amount of people on FBooks who don't read. Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed, and tolerance with them. In this formulation, I do not imply, for instance, that we should always suppress the utterance of intolerant philosophies. As long as we can counter them by rational argument and keep them in check by public opinion, suppression would certainly be most unwise. But we should claim the right to suppress them if necessary, even by force, for it may easily turn out that they are not prepared to meet us on the level of rational argument. But begin by denouncing all argument. They may forbid their followers to listen to rational argument, because it is deceptive, strong, and teach them to answer arguments by the use of their fists or pistols. We should therefore claim, in the name of tolerance, the right not to tolerate the intolerant. We should claim that any movement preaching intolerance places itself outside the law, and we should consider incitement to intolerance and persecution as criminal, in the same way as we should consider incitement to murder, or to kidnapping, or to the revival of the slave trade as criminal. The paradox of tolerance only lets you be intolerant, and to suppress intolerant ideas of people who engage in violence. The paradox of tolerance only lets you be intolerant, and to suppress intolerant ideas of people who engage in violence. I really don't think that you read the text you quoted. It says that we should suppress all intolerant ideas, but not to start with violent suppression of those ideas due to the risk of the intolerant also starting with violence. I really don't think you read the text because you stop the summary halfway through. But we should claim the right to suppress them if necessary, even by force, for it may easily turn out that they are not prepared to meet us on the level of rational argument, but begin by denouncing all argument. They may forbid their followers to listen to rational argument, because it is deceptive, and strong teach them to answer arguments by the use of their fists or pistols. Why would he say the use fist and pistols if violence wasn't the caveat? Please point out where he makes another stipulation. Seriously. Read that passage one word at a time. It's not a caveat, it's a warning of possible consequence of violent suppression. Seriously? Dude, if you can't point out where, at the series of words that completely disprove my assumption, how should I be able to see them? To me, it's obvious that violence is the line that crosses from tolerance to intolerance. In this formulation, I do not imply, for instance, that we should always suppress the utterance of intolerant philosophies, as long as we can counter them by rational argument and keep them in check by public opinion. Suppression would certainly be most unwise. Intolerance should not always be stamped out wherever it exists, as long as we can engage in discourse to resolve issues. But we should claim the right to suppress them, if necessary, even by force. Force is justified when, block quote, for it may easily turn out that they are not prepared to meet us on the level of rational argument, but begin by denouncing all argument. People reject discourse as a way of solving problems. They may forbid their followers to listen to rational argument, because it is deceptive, and teach them to answer arguments by the use of their fists or pistols. And their ideologies call for violence. I read a lot of older books, and they are full of everything from casual racism and misogyny to full-on white power undertones. It can pull me out of a book I'm reading purely for fun, but if it's a book with some merit, I have no trouble just taking it in the context it was written and rolling with it. But give me a book written this year by some racist, shit-stain American, and I ain't touching it with a 10. Poll, no matter how many liberal critics rave about it being the next Ulysses. I get enough of that perspective thrust into my life on a daily basis that I have no interest in or much to gain from immersing myself in its art. But to circle back to OP's point, I have no problem with characters with these traits humanizing them, or even a bigoted perspective as long as it's well removed from the U.S. perspective I'm immersed in. I love your point that morally corrupt or harmful people can still produce good, important, and culturally significant art. The idea that only good people can create good art is dangerous and devastatingly simplistic. James Watson was a pretty abhorrent racist, but he also discovered DNA. To assume that because Watson was morally deficient doesn't mean he wasn't also intelligent and integral to modern science. Both things can be true. Should Watson be upheld as a decent person? No, probably not. But his work also should not be entirely dismissed, questioned and consumed critically with the understanding that he would be severely affected by bias. Yes, absolutely, but not outright dismissed. Edited immediately after posting, removed a sentence that I didn't feel expressed my point correctly. Roland Barthes agrees. Outstanding post, informative and accessible. You don't happen to be an educator, particularly of English Lit, do you? Close, haha. A writer, and thank you. Thank you for saying what I was thinking better than I would have said it. It is sometimes interesting to read something by an audience and realize how differently people can think. I once was reading a 1950s-era detective story where the detective, a police officer, was at one point interviewing two suspects in a pub, and as they got drunker and drunker, all sorts of plot-relevant stuff came out. At the end, the police officer said, "Okay, well, you're pretty drunk, so make sure you drive home safely." And then he sees them both driving very carefully out of the pub car park, nods to himself happily, and goes about his business. That was a glaring example of social change. It is sometimes interesting to read something by an audience and realize how differently people can think. I once was reading a 1950s-era detective story where the detective, a police officer, was at one point interviewing two suspects in a pub, and as they got drunker and drunker, all sorts of plot-relevant stuff came out. At the end, the police officer said, "Okay, well, you're pretty drunk, so make sure you drive home safely." And then he sees them both driving very carefully out of the pub car park, nods to himself happily, and goes about his business. That was a glaring example of social change. I think this is a really interesting take. Do you have any examples you'd point to? You're maybe not factoring the fact that we don't have unlimited time and resources to read. There's something to be said about consumers' choice to invest read time and money towards authors who participate in perpetuating harmful ideas when there's no shortage of authors writing good books who don't, or even better, contribute to offering healthier, more ethical alternatives to those worldviews. With unlimited time, sure, why not read all of it? But that's not the reality of most people's lives and how they read. Two misconceptions here: that it's easy to find the good authors and distinguish healthier, ethical worldviews. We are not morally removed from the ethics of time. We are in the muck with everyone else. In 50 years, something will be abhorrent that you and I don't bat an eye at. That there is no value in reading work from unethical authors, or even from unethical works. I vehemently disagree with the thesis of Lord of the Flies. I do not think the worldview presented in that book is in any way productive. However, reading it and realizing I despised what it was proposing and why I did so helped me discover more about my own personal beliefs and why I held them. And even when it is endorsement, that doesn't mean the book is complete garbage. If you're not reading good work written by deeply flawed people, including the ones whose beliefs might be hatefully on display sometimes in their work, then you're basically assuming that either A, a hateful, misguided person is incapable of producing effective art, B, artists on the right side of every issue are always the best ones to teach you what goes on in the hearts and minds of the ones who are wrong. This is such an obvious false dichotomy, and the fact that people don't see through it is so funny to me. On A, you can think hateful people are capable of producing effective art and still just choose to read the effective art from non-hateful people. There's more effective art that you or I could read in our lifetimes. On B, you can learn about what is in people's minds through more than just art. If anything, it will probably give you a far more accurate understanding to read about the psychology and history of Hitler than reading Mein Kampf or admiring his paintings would ever do. This is a complex topic, and reducing it to two arbitrary options that are clearly not the only ways to go about this is very simplistic. I actually agree with you, and instead of "you're basically assuming" the lazy way out, I should have said you should ask yourself if you are assuming, especially since an important aspect of my comment is the danger of imposing your own relationship with art and media on everyone else. The fact that people don't see through it is so funny to me. I don't think it's that odd, or that people are dumbed. Instead, it's that you're right, I dropped the ball with my reductionism, but that people mostly just heard you should ask yourself and did me that favor, and because you're a little off base in your specific critiques of A and B. On A, you can think hateful people are capable of producing effective art and still just choose to read the effective art from non-hateful people. There's more effective art that you or I could read in our lifetimes. Also agree, but only in general. In practice, you've got the stuff you want to learn about, experience, and relate to, and limited time and energy to triage the choice paralysis. It's messy, and you don't know which is which or which objectively moral artists, good luck pinning that down, are optimally effective ones. In fact, if you knew that in every case, you wouldn't need to read anything new. Effectiveness is not a metric intrinsic to the work. It's individual to the person. That's a big part of the societal challenge here. People wanting to protect and prevent other people from rewarding the immoral artists. But that's one of the great contradictions of maintaining free versus safe civilizations. It's hard and it's painfully inconvenient to our sense of justice when someone we want penalized benefits from work that benefits others. Example, Son of Sam laws in the US which bar convicted felons from profiting on work they produce regarding their crimes. A rare case where it's not so hard to draw a line, because convicted of murder feels definitive. On B, you can learn about what is in people's minds through more than just art. If anything, it will probably give you a far more accurate understanding to read about the psychology and history of Hitler than reading Mein Kampf or admiring his paintings would ever do. That's very risky, in my opinion. Far better to do both. No one is a better authority on what Hitler believes you should believe than Hitler, and Hitler is a critical resource when vetting psychological analysis of people like Hitler and the work they produce. And there's something else only Hitler can teach you: how you respond to his words and ideas, what it's like to be either in his thrall, outraged by his gall and cruelty, or perhaps worst of all, disappointed by how fucking boring most of Mein Kampf is. Because that boredom, if you experience it, is the most dangerous gateway for fascism. Complacency in the face of ideas that don't relate to your own history. That uncomfortable notion drives, I believe, much of the suffocating discourse around this stuff. We cannot simultaneously condone the messy and fraught relationship others have with dangerous ideas and the need to allow dangerous ideas to spread in some fashion, unless we admit that we can never be objectively sure we are on the right side of anything, or won't become someone in the future we don't recognize or admire. You don't even have to believe morality is relative to agree with that. Only admit you're probably not more qualified than average to know what's best. How many of us are willing to admit that? Is it even wise to do so? I'm not sure. And that is exactly why I steer myself towards art that makes me uncomfortable and angry and look for the beauty in it. I understand why that's alarming, though. It's a vicious circle, isn't it? I'm qualified to put dangerous ideas in context in case they contain something uncomfortably true. But others, young people, ignorant people, corrupt and grar, you heard it here, folks. It doesn't matter that you'll be subjected to disgusting racism by reading Lovecraft. It doesn't matter if you've already learned about racism from much better places, including your own lived experiences. Nope. You're anti-intellectual. You're denying white people their art if you call that art racist and suggest we shouldn't constantly be consuming art that reinforces our racial caste system. And when people argue with you that insert the book they just read isn't actually racist at all, what they really mean is that it's okay for them to read racist stuff because they're learning what not to do. This is so wildly off base, lol. No one's forcing you to read anything, nor telling you to ignore racism, sexism, etc. They're saying that reading something from someone who holds these hateful views can still be valuable, even if it's just to help you understand why someone would hold these views. I mean, your stance seems to imply that either A, bad people have absolutely nothing they could ever say that would ever be valuable, or B, readers are incapable of parsing what is valuable from what is not, and need to be protected from dangerous work because they're just too dumb to not be corrupted by it. I think the person you are replying to is mostly responding to the argument that electing to not read the works of racism, misogynists, etc. makes one anti-intellectual. That's a patently absurd claim that I'm seeing a lot of in this thread. Then you've completely misread the context of this thread, which honestly demonstrates that your B is pretty accurate. Are you really going to claim that whatever value Lovecraft stories have outweighs the negative reinforcement they serve? Because your B seems to assume that nobody is racist, I guess. Do you think that all readers, or even most of them, can successfully distinguish bad messages from good? And if so, why is your problem with people correctly identifying that Lovecraft as insanely racist and not with the people who think he has a point about black people? Which is it? Are most readers incorrectly ascertaining that the works of Lovecraft reflect his personal, racist views, or are most readers capable of that media literacy? The argument of this thread is that media literacy is not a widespread skill, at least not to an adequate degree. So, if you're agreeing with that, then again, why is it the only bad media literacy you have a problem with is maybe someone incorrectly assuming an author is racist, rather than actually racist authors influencing hundreds or even thousands to be racist. A hateful, misguided person is incapable of producing effective art. I'm curious, where, if anywhere, do you draw the line on what would be effective art, even if it contains immoral, antisocial ideas? I guess a further question is, does it even matter if something is effective art if it promotes an antisocial idea? Shouldn't the antisocial part trump the effective art part, in terms of, you guess it, social acceptability? Why shouldn't society shun antisocial effective art? Mind you, this second question doesn't presume an absolute social value of effective art. What do you mean by antisocial or immoral? Those definitions vary massively in culture, time period, and geography. A lot of people at the moment want to get rid of a lot of LGBTQ effective art because they view that as antisocial/immoral. What do you mean by antisocial or immoral? Whatever contradicts the liberal interpretation of fundamental human rights, which LGBTQ does not. More universally, and equally valid, we could just use the moral veil of ignorance approach to judge if something ought to be considered antisocial or immoral. Highly immoral or antisocial art can still be art. What do morals have to do with the quality of art? I think that, in the social realm, society is completely entitled, in all situations, to confer or withhold social value on social issues, and I would qualify art as a social issue. In that regard, I see really no issue or problem with social opprobrium of antisocial art. That is, that art would have lowest social quality, even if we may measure it in other ways as well. I would further argue that social context is a big part of the context of judging art, even art per se, further increasing the argument that the social aspect can trump other dimensions when judging art. I come from a country that did indeed do that and brought it to its extreme. A lot of art was deemed without social value or even antisocial. The artists who had produced such degenerate art weren't allowed to practice their art, were forced to produce proper, socially beneficent art, or were incarcerated or had to flee. However, their art was the one that actually was good. There is literally no example of such social value promoting art of any actual artistic value. Kitsch is probably the most friendly description. No society should never decide what is good and what is bad art. One of the things art can do is to shock and get a discussion going. A society which already claims any such art to be worthless is intellectually dead. No society should never decide what is good and what is bad art. The easiest way to disprove your universal claim is art depicting molesting minors. The whole art is a priori beyond social moral judgment makes absolutely no sense in a social setting, as art doesn't inherently possess that moral exception. Is Lolita not art? Wasn't the topic what qualifies as art per se, and not can and should we designate certain works or forms of art as socially unacceptable? If it's actual art and not pornography, then why not? You don't need to like it. If it's actual art and not pornography, then why not? You don't need to like it. My wager is that nothing besides a correctional facility and/or a therapist could convince such a person of the wrongness of that. The reader is the arbiter of what they consider good work. There can be art produced by misguided individuals that one can consider to still be good work. Most historical figures held views that modern folk would find reprehensible, yet their work is still considered good. The reader is the arbiter of what they consider good work. That's just a partial truth, though. Each of us does that. But there is also a social valuation of a good work. I am asking in the latter regard. I am curious, where, if anywhere, do you draw the line on what would be effective art, even if it contains immoral antisocial ideas? People are accountable for their choices. A very funny joke that hurts someone is very funny, and it hurts someone. The mistake isn't calling it funny. The mistake is believing funny gets you off the hook for your choices and convictions. I can laugh, feel bad I laughed, ask myself why I found humor in something hurtful, and decide I am both more sure of my moral position and also, once again, a flawed and contradictory being. I laugh at pain sometimes. That's all right, as long as it's not an excuse. It's remarkable how much of the internet's knee-jerk problem with evaluating media really just boils down to a refusal to be told a thing can be more than one thing. I guess a further question is, does it even matter if something is effective art, if it promotes an antisocial idea? Yes, it matters, because whatever is the reality and has an effect on reality matters. That's mattering. Shouldn't the antisocial part trump the effective art part? In terms of, you guess it, social acceptability? In terms of social acceptability? Yes, probably. Now we're ranking. If I have to choose between a net negative effect on real people and becoming wiser, I don't like this dichotomy much. I want to know the specifics. But in a vacuum, I don't see how I can say anything except, pick the thing that helps more people be okay than the thing that makes me understand the world a little better. This is far from ironclad, though. Specifics matter, and I expect traps can be set in hypotheticals here. Why shouldn't society shun antisocial effective art? Mind you, this second question doesn't presume an absolute social value of effective art, assuming a spherical cow in a vacuum that is also Mein Kampf. Also, what is shunning? Personally, I have very different feelings about the marketplace excoriating and boycotting something because it's effective and toxic propaganda than the ones I have about a government patting me on the head and saying, trust us, you don't need to know what's in that one, read this one. Really, the question you're asking is one of the hardest to answer in any society. How can we benefit maximally from knowing how predators and fascists think and operate? Simultaneously minimize damage done by the very material we'd use to gain insights. Who is a qualified reader with the right perspective? Fuck if I know, sorry. Things can be two things is the best I've got. The sad part is, that is a sorely needed message. I laugh at pain sometimes. That's all right, as long as it's not an excuse. Well, more to the point of your comment, I wouldn't call it all right, only habitual, lest it risks becoming the excuse we would both abhor. It's remarkable how much of the internet's knee-jerk problem with evaluating media really just boils down to a refusal to be told a thing can be more than one thing. I don't think you tell the whole story, though. Yes, it can be more than one thing, but in a social setting, social attribute A trumps whatever attributes B, C, D may be. Yes, it matters. Because whatever is the reality and has an effect on reality matters. That's mattering. I agree, I was not specific enough. It is the same question. On a M-social scale, social priorities trump artistic issue, pretty much by definition, right? Personally, I have very different feelings about the marketplace excoriating and boycotting something because it's effective and toxic propaganda than the ones I have about a government patting me on the head and saying, trust us. You don't need to know what's in that one. Read this one. We are in agreement on that. Really, the question you're asking is one of the hardest to answer in any society. How can we benefit maximally from knowing how predators and fascists think and operate, and simultaneously minimize damage done by the very material we'd use to gain insights? Who is a qualified reader with the right perspective? I would say we should be comfortable with a blanket social ban on prejudiced media, which sometimes should overlap with legal bans. I find the art is free from moral judgment that is implicit throughout this thread, and in the art discussions in general, to be a weak and unsupported position. I find the art is free from moral judgment that is implicit throughout this thread, and in the art discussions in general, to be a weak and unsupported position. I have no problem with that. In fact, a succinct way to frame my position might be, I want to see as much productive moral judgment of great art as possible. What's so troubling to me is the commodification of art as a means of demonstrating one's own moral correctness. I'd much rather hear honest confessions of how ugly ideas challenged people to confront their demons, without judgment. Everyone needs to do that. A culture where everyone is claiming otherwise is almost certainly rotting in some way. I'd much rather hear honest confessions of how ugly ideas challenge people to confront their demons without judgment. In my experience, so far, the use of art in a psychological, moral, therapeutic way is a thin veneer for a compulsion/fetish for said prejudice. I don't have much faith in such form of non-professional self-medication. But that's generally speaking. Addressing your point in particular, I agree that there is inherent value in actually trying to improve oneself, but I am convinced that most of us would hide our demons and failings and keep our social appearances up. I find your proposal very intriguing, but it would likely never ever happen in a society where machismo still finds a niche. As long as it's in person, private, I find a great many people perfectly willing to exchange honest and uncomfortable self-perceptions gained from experiences in art. But it helps a lot to be the one who goes first, so people know they've got permission. I don't think it's some wacky proposal. It's just a function art has performed for thousands of years, often as a formative basis for more art, and marriages and many other things. Nevertheless, it's a practice that can wax, wane, and recontextualize, not always for the better. I envy your discussions. I am perhaps more cynical. I doubt we usually explicitly formulate our own moral failings to ourselves, so sincerity about those most delicate issues seems even less likely. Here is to having more of those discussions, though. A very funny joke that hurts someone is very funny, and it hurts someone. The mistake isn't calling it funny. The mistake is believing funny gets you off the hook for your choices. People are not responsible for the reactions of others, unless the joke was aimed explicitly at them with the intention to insult or hurt them. Learning this used to be taught as an important part of becoming an adult. Unless we're talking about Starship Troopers, in which case that Dutch asshole can do no wrong. B especially is a point really well taken. Wow, so many people need to take this into account. A hateful, misguided person is incapable of producing effective art. B, artists on the right side of every issue are always the best ones to teach you what goes on in the hearts and minds of the ones who are wrong. That's pretty reductive. There's at least one more option. C, the marginal value of consuming art from a person you find objectionable versus similar art from a better person doesn't justify the perceived social cost of supporting objectionable people financially, helping provide them the wherewithal to continue expressing their views. And I think that most people who choose to avoid works from folks they find objectionable actually fall into this category, not A or B. And it's also where the interesting and fruitful conversations can be had. irfm.reddit.com/our-book/comments 19-6 kjmikx/ share and UTM medium through medium UTM M web 3x CSS and term equal content alternative. Agree it's a bit reductive actually. I'm amazed at how many educated readers don't understand that the character doesn't mean the author is the same way. Or even that characters you're supposed to relate to are allowed to have flaws. Someone please tell this to Hollywood. Finger-pointing gives you clout now. It always did in repressive authoritarian societies. That or it deflected the mob long enough for you to get away with whatever it was they were going to come get you for. True enough. In my opinion, it's because these days, unless you explicitly state, "I do not endorse this behavior," younger generations think that you do endorse the behavior, as if you need to be aggressively anti to prove that you're not pro. Have to be aggressively anti to prove you're not pro. This is the primary cause of extremism. Consequences for being pro? Rewards for being anti? Don't be surprised if you end up with people competing to be the most anti, especially those who have something to hide and are desperately trying to outpace and outrun the suspicion of their peers. You end up with everyone crowding into anti, and in order to have something to be anti against, you end up trying to paint anyone who isn't as anti as you as if they're pro, so that you can attack them to signal your virtue and prove that you are indeed anti. This is why the most anti-gay politicians are often secretly gay. It's a bit off topic, but you see this in true crime communities all the time. People want to try to outdo each other to make sure everyone knows how much they hate pedophiles and murderers by talking about how violently they would murder one if they encountered one, and it's a bit strange. Anthony Fantano revisited his review of the Lana Del Rey album Ultraviolence, which he absolutely trashed when he originally reviewed it. In his reconsideration of it, now that she's critically acclaimed and therefore acceptable for people like him to like, he was still critical of her for not coming out and condemning abusive relationships in the title track. It's obvious by a remark like that he's never been in an abusive relationship. No room for nuance, but make sure you proclaim as loudly as possible how anti you are of bad thing, lest someone think you support it. It's crazy how black and white so many people's thinking is, that it has to be spelled out like that. You would think that when it comes to art and fictional works, people would be able to understand that these are made up by the creator's mind and do not necessarily represent their beliefs and views. Honestly, you just see this behavior in most, if not all, fandom communities because it's become increasingly popular with the youth. I'm 28, but many peers my age and younger are louder and louder on what is and is not acceptable to enjoy. You genuinely run the risk of severe harassment turned into death threats and stalking if you have the wrong opinion at the wrong time. It's also becoming increasingly popular to use social justice, talk to moralize and look down on other people for not having the same opinion. And with media literacy being as bad as it is, you get death threats for telling an early 20s child with thousands of followers who have media literacy just as poor that no, Ganondorf is not the poor little colonized victim revolting against the big bad evil Hyrule. It's genuinely insane and was the main reason I left fandom spaces over 10 years ago. I've recently returned because I've been so excited about new releases, but it's so much worse than I remember, and I'm leaving again because it's not worth it. Have to be aggressively anti to prove you're not pro. This is the primary cause of extremism. Exactly. That and extremist thought usually hinges on the false dichotomy logic fallacy. You're either for the cause or against it. You're either with their political leanings or against them. The failing with this way of thinking is politics, religions, etc., almost any topic, is nuanced. To ignore that nuance is both ridiculous and short-sighted, not to mention completely ignores the other person's view. It's puritanical and a little 1984-ish with putting wrong-think into the memory hole. In the current generation, I believe it was the progressive refrain of impact above intention and context doesn't matter. In the last generation, it was the evangelical cries of satanic. Context totally matters, but both the context in which it was created and the context in which it's repeated matter. I agree, but unfortunately we are dealing with subjectivity here, so while I agree with your statement, I might not agree with the intention behind your statement. Please do expand. The latter group are still around. They've just moved on to shouting about groomers, which seems to be pretty effective. See, I see the opposite, as it is only people online trying to make money with hot takes about purity culture type of things. I've not really seen that translated over to real life. I do still see boomers and evangelicals taking over school boards to ban books with ideas they don't like by authors they don't approve of. The war on woke has done far more real-life damage in my view regarding this. Yeah, because you are probably a progressive. I see progressives and conservatives as two sides of the same coin. Both are anti-liberal, intolerant, and are purity cultures. They both censor and repressive ideas that offend them, and both are equally guilty at pursuing the culture war and distracting people from getting beneficial political change. Not a book, but as a longtime Attack on Titan fan, I practically have this phrase in my muscle memory from dealing with so many media illiterate boobs. A problem censored is a problem solved. Excerpt from Perfect Political Proverbs, a guidebook for the professionally offended, by Dr. Morgan Faust. It got said too often about actual endorsements. Also, depiction doesn't mean endorsement, but depiction isn't neutral either. After all, it's been a long time since, particularly with regard to race, there has been much in the way of overt bigotry in popular books in the Western market. But that doesn't mean Western literature is post-racial. It's just now it comes out in the form of what types of characters and attitudes are over or underrepresented in imagined universes. Where are you getting that idea from? There are a lot of books published every year that deal directly with racism, and they obviously depict it as part of doing that. Is this supposed to be an argument? That has nothing to do with what they said, let alone constituting a rebuttal to what they said. Try actually engaging with their comment, instead of getting mad that someone said something about underrepresentation. True, depiction can give a glance into the author's biases and prejudices, even if they're unintentional or subconscious. A lot of authors came out of the asshole closest. The idea that anyone who has ever done anything assholish or has an opinion or idea that is contrary to the dominant viewpoint, an asshole, as in that one opinion or action is their identity now and should render them outcast, or that they need to wear the scarlet letter, is a disgusting, authoritarian impulse. It is also highly anti-intellectual in that it ignores that many of our social norms will be considered just as backwards and ignorant in the future as we view people from the past. The notion that people are bad based on their ideas and opinions alone is seriously warped and authoritarian. It used to be uncontroversial among people who considered themselves enlightened that actions are what makes a person, not the landscape of ideas they entertain. You have to extend that definition so broadly, just to say J.K. Rowling isn't an anti-trans asshole, that you basically just said that thinking anything about anything someone has said is anti-intellectual. Saying she is an anti-trans asshole uses the trick of labeling to ignore what she is doing and instead go straight to condemnation and judgment. I assume you are claiming that is her full-time job? Is it her job title? I don't like or agree with some of the opinions she has about the subject, but is she actively harming trans people? Is she organizing to take away their rights? What exactly is she doing? You can just say what she is doing rather than stick a label on her, which is a trick to shut down any conversation about what she is saying or her opinions by saying anyone who considers the ideas she brings up is also an anti-trans asshole. It is an inherently anti-intellectual tactic that religious people and other ideologues love to use to shut down the discussion of ideas. I don't support her, much less the entire body of her opinions and thoughts regarding transgenderism, because I really don't know enough about either to say. But I have seen a lot of the tactic of labeling to shut down any conversation about what she has said. It's a cheap, intellectually dishonest tactic to label someone a racist, a sexist, a heretic, a communist, etc., to shut down any consideration about what they are saying, and that I am definitely opposed to. She doesn't get paid for it, but it might as well be her job. Call her a volunteer. Yes, she is actively harming trans people and organizing to take away or keep away their rights. You went through all of that while admitting you don't know enough about her or her views, actions to say. It would be better to learn about her before getting into this subject. She is an anti-trans asshole. You might have a point in some cases, but not this one. At first, she might have only been saying some questionable things, but she has doubled and tripled down on all of it. She has come to support and befriend self-professed anti-trans activists who are also just right-wing extremists, like Magdalene Burns and Posey Parker. The Gap series by Stephen R. Donaldson is a great example of this. He wrote the first one and introduced a truly foul character as a villain. And after the book was done, he had to take some time off because he was so uncomfortable that a character like that could live inside him. The author's Not on that first book is one of the most interesting I've ever read. People are simple. The majority of them don't want to have to think too hard during leisure time. Nuance hurts their smooth little brains. How can I upvote this 1,000,000 times? How you depict something can endorse it, intentional or otherwise. But not all depictions are endorsements. Spot on. It depends on if the depiction is intentional. If the character is racist in a subtle way, and that isn't addressed at any point in the book, i.e., no one ever mentions it and the character is portrayed as an upstanding hero without judgmental faults, then it can be interpreted as the author's latent racism. Context and the time in which it was written matters, but most people can tell when a mediocre author inserts their own opinions. And good art requires some level of empathy, if only to be able to place themselves in others' shoes in order to write fully fleshed out characters that are unlike themselves. If you've ever read a book with a character that works in your field and you hear some wildly unrealistic stuff they supposedly think, then you can tell the author lacks the ability to place themselves in that character's shoes. Understanding the thoughts and motivations of people who are unlike you is hard. Some authors know their limits and don't attempt characters they know they wouldn't be able to write accurately yet. Some authors think they can just take a version of themselves, change the gender, skin color, and economic circumstances, and everything should be copacetic. No? No, you need to do work to understand a character like that, and all those factors contributed to making you who you are today. So why wouldn't it be the same for someone different from you? I imagine the fried attention spans of the new generations can't sit still long enough to comprehend such an idea.